Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
Think you know the Brooks Ghost? Think again. Introducing the all-new, better-than-ever Ghost 16. Now with nitrogen-infused cushioning for lightweight, supreme softness that feels good every step, every street, every single day. So go ahead, take your daily joyride in the all-new nitrogen-infused Ghost 16. It'll turn your everyday miles into everyday endorphins. Let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Happy Tuesday, Kieran. What can I tell you? This is we've been predicting this for some time. We've been warning, advising, whatever the right word is. But here we are with our first questions pod on a Tuesday, and here we are recording it in exactly the same time as we would do the Monday one. It's Sunday morning. Exactly the same routine for some reason. Don't ask me about change, Kieran.
It's a bank holiday, and I think this is actually quite good coming out on Tuesday because it's a train strike. So there's lots of people having extended walks of the dog and long session down the gym, just like we do, of course. We're workout junkies, aren't we?
You've seen our listeners, Kieran. If there's a train strike, they're not going to the gym. Our listeners are not walking to the gym and doing a gym session. Yeah, I say I hate change, unless it's mayors of large conurbations, in which case I'm perfectly happy for that to happen again. Also, I should point out to the listeners that we're doing this on Sunday morning, a little bit earlier than normal, because somebody has to be at a Brighton game today, and somebody, in a rather provocative exercise, is wearing their Brighton shirt as we do the podcast. I thought we discussed this. No shirts.
Yeah, but it is 41 years old, or from the 83 to 85 era. So.
Oh, okay. And tell everyone why you're wearing... Who's away, Kieran, which is why you're allowed to wear your shirt early?
Yeah, well, the Baroness is looking after our grandchildren for 3 or 4 days.
I should also point out to our listeners, Kieran, that, and this is true, in memory of my dad, we decided to put a bird feeder up in the garden. He loved feeding the birds. So we put a bird feeder up in the garden, it's been really nice watching the birds flitting through. It's been really nice watching a particularly clever pigeon headbutt it so the seeds drop onto the floor. But it's driving the cat up the fucking wall.
Oh, no.
So she's getting more exercise than she's ever got in her life because she's doing a lot of bum waggling, pretending that she's going to catch these birds scampering out and then scampering back disappointed. So if you hear some thumping, that'll be what's going on. Although not as much thumping as our gardener turning up because he needed 50 quid last week when we were interviewing the most intense man in football to the background noise of a gardener getting a free 50 quid. It's questions day, Kieran. Tuesday. Don't be confused, people at home. And our first question comes from Shane Mawson. I'm worried we're putting people's week out, Kieran. People will be putting the bins out on the wrong day because they'll think it's Thursday and it's not. It's Wednesday.
And they might have a new mayor. Yeah, they might have new mayors, and therefore they will have to have new. They could have, as to celebrate, they might have new bins days.
Oh, that would please the people of Birmingham, wouldn't it? I should preface this by saying I love the city of Birmingham. Spent a lot of time there, but it will take more than a new bin day to cheer up most of the population of Birmingham. Well, half of them this morning, anyway, after yesterday. Shane Mawson says, with the ownership of Newcastle United being separated into 3 entities, how long will PCP and the Rubin brothers be able to maintain their 10% ownership in the club before it becomes too valuable for them to hold on to? I find this a particularly interesting question, Kieran. There are quite a few clubs, my own included, that still have people owning 2 and 3%, while the other 96% is owned by much wealthier people. It makes you wonder why and how those people would keep that percentage of the club anyway, because they're certainly not having any day-to-day say in the running of it.
I mean, Newcastle is a complex one, and we're going to start off by having people scratching their heads on a Tuesday morning. If we go to Newcastle United Limited, Newcastle United is owned by a company called PZ Nuco, or PZ Nuco for our American listeners. And PZ Nuco is owned 80% by NCUK Investment, which is owned itself by the Saudi Arabian Investment Fund, and 20% owned by a company called JV1, which itself is owned by Amanda Staveley via Cantervale Holdings, and RB Sports and Media, owned by the Reuben brothers. So, yeah, I've lost the whole audience. The BAFTA has gone already. I'll be the first to admit that. It's just as well the Baroness is away, because I had to get up extra early to go through Companies House records to get all of these right. And what we are seeing is that Newcastle United are issuing single shares, so it doesn't really affect the percentages. So they did one for £60 million last August. They've done one for £37 million about 6 weeks ago. So that doesn't really impact upon the 80-20 split. But what we are seeing increasingly is that as far as the non-PIF ownership is concerned, originally Amanda Staveley effectively owned 10%, and the Reuben brothers owned 10%. And every time there's a change, Amanda Staveley's not buying any more shares, and the Reuben brothers are. So we're seeing her slice of the pie getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it was 10% before last month. It was down to just over 6. I think it's now probably around about 5.75 and so on. So her investment is diluting because either through choice or through necessity, she's not been buying into Newcastle, because Newcastle doing very well on the pitch, as we know. But that it costs the club a lot of money to invest in players, to invest in wages. So the club is losing money, and those losses are effectively being funded by the shareholders. But it's coming from PIF and the Reuben brothers, from what we can make out of Companies House.
Right, okay. And what about Shane's idea that eventually a small percentage ownership in the club will become too valuable for somebody to hold on to? Is that a concept you would agree with?
We're talking about extremely wealthy people to begin with.
Right. Oh, okay. Right.
So, they don't need to sell. Now, there could be a position in the future where somebody makes you an offer which is too good to turn down. And, that's business. So the Reuben brothers, they're clearly very smart to have got to their position. I can't see PIF wanting to pull out, given the success that Newcastle have had. Won Champions League. They're doing really well this season. They're probably, they're almost certain to be in Europe again next season. And we know that from a soft power point of view, have ownership of a football club does bring benefits. So the only person I could potentially see selling out at some point would be Amanda Staveley. It could be that she either sells out to PIF or she gives up her shares to the Reuben brothers, because they make her a good offer. And she has been reducing her stake, in effect, over the past 18 months.
And would there be any advantage, Kieran, for PIF to own 100% of Newcastle, or is the fact that they own such a big majority essentially make them the owners of Newcastle United anyway?
Yeah, they've got control. I think in terms of reading the room, passing the smell test, all of these things, having some domestic ownership is of benefit,
right.
But it's not a necessity. Amanda Staveley is very much the public face of the boardroom, and by her having still got a substantial investment in Newcastle United, I think from a PR point of view, the focus is on her rather than PIF itself.
Talking of domestic ownership or otherwise, Kieran, we will be talking about this on Thursday, only 2 days' time now, but more potential creditors for 777 coming out of the woodwork in the last couple of days, weren't there, that you tweeted?
Yes. Again, you got to give credit to the likes of Matt Slater and David Helliard at Bloomberg and other bodies who are following this. There has been a court case, a civil court case rather than a criminal court case, with regards to 777, and the allegations are very significant. The allegations are in effect of 777 borrowing money against assets, so it's effectively being mortgaged, and then going out to another lender and using the same assets for a separate mortgage. And I can tell you from personal experience, I once ran a narrowboat company, which had gone into administration in 1987. And I sort of did all paperwork, and well, we had 26 narrowboats, and we had 62 lenders, because what the owner of the company had done was, let's say he would go to Barclays and say, I've got this narrowboat called Bluebell. It's worth 80 grand. Will you lend us 50? They come down, get someone to take a look at it. Yeah, we're fine. And then what he did was that he unscrewed the nameplate for the boat.
No.
And he'd go and put on Daisy, and he'd get HSBC in, and he said, well, it's worth 80 grand. Will you give us 50? HSBC would look down. Yeah, okay. There's no existing charges against Daisy, so therefore they'd lend him 50 grand. So when we were called in, and I was working on site all the time, it was awkward, to put it very mildly. And he went to Bogota. He decided to, which meant that he wasn't answering calls. Yeah. So it was one of the trickiest administrations I'd had, but it's all part of the learning curve.
You see, he thought he'd go to Colombia and owe other people some money, did he?
Yeah. Do you know? I don't think he travelled by narrowboat.
No, as a professional comedy writer, Kieran, I've just been going through the Rolodex, and you'd think there'd be more canal-based insolvency puns than there actually are that I can come up with. What I will say, Kieran, is did you have to change the locks?
Oh, very good. Very good.
You're welcome. That's all right. It's either that or the Far Canal, but there you are. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Martin Toll. I'm not saying this is a complex question, Kieran, but any question where the opening line is, it seems to me that the way the EFL administers financial fair play is fundamentally unfair. I think, we're going to strap ourselves in for the answer to this one. But Martin says, it seems to him that the way the EFL administers financial fair play is fundamentally unfair based on a maximum permitted financial loss in the Championship of £39 million over a 3-year period, and a salary cap of 60% of turnover in League One and 55% in League Two. Surely this just enshrines inequality. Big clubs, for example Leeds, with their international following, or clubs with large ground and higher matchday revenues, have a larger income and can spend more before they run into a loss or exceed the cap. These clubs can then spend more on players, achieve great success, and further increase inequality. It would make more sense and be fairer to have an even playing field. Let clubs have the same limit on salaries or transfer spending, not a proportion of revenue. If big clubs make more money, fine, they can spend it on their stadium, academy, and training facilities. And what Martin's doing there, quite laudably, is what a lot of us are doing, Kieran, trying to find ways of levelling the playing field. But finer minds than ours are struggling with that, aren't they?
Yes. I mean, we spoke about anchoring on the Thursday show, which would potentially create a level playing field of sorts, but that sort of backstop powers. I think the biggest issue for me was that when financial fair play was first mooted, so we're talking around about 2009, 2010, we all latched on to the word fair.
Yeah.
And fair
point.
I think intuitively say, well, okay, at the start of the season, you would hope that, 10, 12, 14 teams in the Premier League or in the Championship and so on have a chance of promotion. And that is not the case. If you go to UEFA's annual report, it does state in black and white that this is not an attempt to effectively share the trophies around, share the pie. But I think intuitively, you do think of the word fair. And when I talk to fans from certain clubs, they do like the idea of fairness, but only fairness again when it's their club compared to the clubs earning more than theirs.
Yeah, of course.
So, let's be honest, Brighton and Palace, effectively, we've got the same resources. We're approximately the same size, fan base, stadium, there's a few minor differences. We think it's unfair that Manchester City, Manchester United, Liverpool have got a wage bill which is 3 times of ours. They've got squad costs which are 4 or 5 times of ours. So we think that's unfair, but we don't think it's unfair that clubs in the Championship only get £7 million of TV money compared to us earning 120 million. So fairness is a huge issue. And I know when I've been asked to create some spreadsheet models for alternative forms of distribution. One of which was, could we do it along the lines of the NFL?
Yeah.
Where all the merchandise sales are put into a pot, all of the TV revenues are split, and they're then split roughly evenly. Even if you take ticket sales, they're split 60-40. 60% goes to the club hosting and 40% goes into an overall pool, which is then split evenly between. So the difference between the cap and the collar, the top and the bottom of the NFL is much narrower than it is in the Premier League or individual leagues in the EFL. And that does mean you've got greater jeopardy and greater uncertainty, and there's an argument that makes it fairer. And when I put that into a spreadsheet, and it took me a long time, and sent it off to the person or persons asked me to do it, I got accused of being a communist. I'm going, well, this is what you asked me to do. I've not read Kieran. I read the Financial Times and the Times every day. I teach on Wall Street. It hardly makes me Wolfie Smith, does it? So I absolutely understand where Martin is coming from. In terms of setting a cap, it then becomes interesting as to where that cap is. Because, again, let's look at our position. If Brighton and Palace are given this cap of 5 times that of the lowest club, which is £500 million, Steve Parish and Tony Bloom say, well, I only want to go and spend 150. So it doesn't actually impact us at all. So it's a messy situation. It's not just in the EFL, because it's effectively the EFL's rules are a replica of those of UEFA and those of the Premier League as well. But I do agree with Martin that it does reduce the number of clubs who potentially at the start of the season have a chance for success. Having said that, hats off to Ipswich Town for being promoted yesterday. Against what is for me the most impressive looking championship that I've seen for many a season in terms of the quality of teams. And hats off to Luton Town for doing exactly the same the previous season. So it can be done, but it certainly reduces the competitiveness if you're going to view competition as what's achieved on the pitch.
I'm glad you mentioned the EFL having different rules, and I'm glad you mentioned the NFL, because I was discussing when we were writing Have I Got News for You the other day, we were chatting with a couple of producers, one of whom is a huge fan of American sport. But we were wondering, or they were wondering, I told them I knew a person who might be able to ask this question. It wasn't me. Could you ever see a situation where there was a financial fair play, salary cap, whatever the rules were, that encompassed all 92 clubs plus the National League? Or do you think there will always, because of the money involved, there'll always have to be a separate FFP deal for the Premier League and then a separate one for the Championship Leagues 1, Leagues 2?
It comes down to the wishes of owners. If you are Walsall or Rotherham, and you have a global cap for all 92 clubs, and that's £500 million, those clubs are never going to get, they're never going to touch the sides in terms of getting near to the cap. So therefore it becomes worthless unless a multi-billionaire comes in and says, right, I'm going to put rocket boosters on this club and accelerate it through, because we are going to recruit Premier League standard players and pay them a Premier League standard wage, because you have to attract them in League 2 and in League 1, because I like the idea of having an Invincibles. And was it Falkirk?
Falkirk, yeah.
Were the Invincibles? Yeah, fair. Yeah. Again, hats off. There's lots of clubs that deserve a lot of credit. I was reading this morning, Hamilton Academicals, every single one of their players came from the academy.
Wow.
Who's played? That's a hell of an achievement.
That's brilliant. Yeah, no, Falkirk. I've been winding up Arsenal fans with how easy it is to go through a season without losing a game. Clearly. This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by the AI-powered workspace Notion. What if you had access to tomorrow's tools today? In Notion, you do. It's the AI-powered workspace where any team can turn ideas into action.
My career is sort of a bit like being a butterfly, and I'm always jumping from project to project. So therefore, Notion helps me from summarising meetings notes and automatically generating action items to getting answers to any question in seconds. If you can think it, you can make it. And Notion is for everyone, whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a freelance football finance lecturer.
You can try Notion for free when you go to notion.com/priceoffootball. That's all lowercase letters, notion.com/priceoffootball, and start turning ideas into action. That's notion.com/priceoffootball.
Hi, I'm Steve Lemack, and every week I'm joined by Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, on The Price of Music, the weekly podcast all about the money behind the music industry. In each episode, we discuss the very latest goings-on in the music business and dig into the finances behind the big stories.
So whether you're a music lover who just wants to know more about what really goes on in the industry, or you're an aspiring musician, manager or label owner who wants some inside knowledge on how Spotify's financial model really works, or what the future holds for independent live music venues, this is a show for you.
Subscribe to The Price of Music in your podcast app now. See you soon.
Nick C has our next question, Kieran. You know my views on not getting the full name, but still, we're asking the question. Nick C says, what's the situation with paying off Wembley? I'm a Man City fan. We played the Charity Shield at the King Power the other year. Imagine being a fan of a club where you can't even remember what year it was you played. You just go, the other year. Well, I can't remember. And Nick said it was a brilliant atmosphere at a neutral venue. I heard that Wembley will be paid off this year. So will the FA from then on not be able to make the argument that playing at Wembley for games like this and FA Cup semi-finals is a financial necessity? We've got brilliant stadiums across the country, and it would seem to fit the aims of community in the Shield more to spread the occasion around. Hear. Quite right, Nick.
Yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy with the argument that Nick's putting forward. So once again, Companies House was given a close scrutiny this morning. If we take a look at the accounts of the Football Association, which fortunately for me came out on Thursday, the FA is profitable and it has no third-party debt. So the FA is making money and is successful. If you then take a look, however, at the accounts of Wembley National Stadium Limited, the position is not as rosy. Wembley National Stadium made a pre-tax loss of £67 million on revenue of 82. There were some technical reasons for that. I'm not denying that. The cost of the stadium was £800 million. This year, they actually wrote down the value of the stadium by £46 million. Yeah, that's not amortization, depreciation, anything. They just said, actually, it's worth less. And the thing which really bugs me, so it's losing money. I think it only had 30 events last year. So if you take out FA Cup final, FA Cup semi-finals, that's going to reduce that. Okay, only by 3. But Community Shield, 4. The FA Cup final would be there. But the semi-finals, why? I don't think FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley, having been to a couple, Wembley's a bit rubbish in terms of atmosphere. So there is certainly scope, but because of the significance of the losses, I think the FA feel that they've got no alternative than to hold the Community Shield and the FA Cup semi-finals there. And also what I spotted when going through the accounts of Wembley National Stadium is that they've taken £120 million in grants. Oh. Now, this is, again, the FA gets a lot of stick, some of which is justified, some of which is not. It's always been my view. But, the FA does do a fair amount in respect of grassroots football. I personally take the view that £120 million spent on grassroots football through grants would have been for greater benefit than improving the seats for the people that don't turn up after half time for 20 minutes because they're in Club Wembley and they're too busy with their canapes. So that, again, you talk about the smell test. It just looks bad at a time when you see so many amateur teams and Sunday league teams and kids teams unable to have fixtures due to the poor conditions of many of the pitches in this country, to have a football stadium, which, as we've just established, was used on 30 occasions last year. So that means on 335 days, there wasn't something taking place. And to be in receipt of £120 million of public funding for what is ultimately a private company, to me, doesn't look good. And I think you've expressed this view. I don't see why we have to have a London stadium as our national stadium, because it's not central. It's not particularly accessible, and the prices they charge are ridiculous.
Well, two issues off the back of that, Kieran. In terms of semi-finals, if Arsenal are playing Tottenham in the semi-final of the FA Cup, makes perfect sense to play at Wembley.
Yeah.
If Man United are playing Liverpool, makes no sense to play at Wembley, especially as they seem to be able to uncannily pick weekends on which there are engineering works or strikes, which makes it doubly difficult for fans to get down. But I presume the FA will say, look, if Man United are playing Liverpool, there's no ground big enough in the north to fit, Wembley can fit 86,000 people in, and that's what we need. So you kind of suspect the genie's not going back in that bottle, no matter how much football fans would want. But the second issue, Kieran, when you say Wembley have got 30 events a year, we spoke last week about Tottenham asking for an extra 30 events. So Tottenham are going to end up with 60 or 70 a year. They're probably not close enough. I suppose they are if Beyonce's got a choice, Wembley or Tottenham. But it seems to me very strange where Tottenham are getting their act together and making a shed load of money, as we discussed, by having more and more events. And Wembley are doing very little by the sound of it. That makes no sense at all. Surely it's their duty as the FA to make as much money out of the stadium as they possibly can on non-football days, because then they won't have to be asking for grants and taking the money out of grassroots football.
And Spurs didn't take any grants.
What, exactly.
I'm probably going to make myself unpopular with a section of the Spurs fan base, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. Spurs are the best run business in the Premier League. What happens on the pitch, other people to decide. What Daniel Levy did was he future-proofed that stadium by having a pitch which you could roll in and roll out. Too much of Wembley was a vanity exercise.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of thought went into it. I think there were other issues with some of the surrounding land, which I'm not prepared to discuss, but I think there could have been better decisions made at the time. And we've had groundsmen on to talk about the importance of the pitch. And whilst we make light of it, it is absolutely critical. Having Wembley Stadium, which is not flexible in terms of usage on non-football match days, is restrictive where Spurs isn't. So fair play to Spurs in terms of what they've done. And I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, if it's a match between two London teams, have it at Wembley, not an issue.
Yeah.
Yes, it's got an 86,000 capacity, but you look at the number of tickets which are sold to the suits and the corporates for an FA Cup semi-final, not the people who are fans of Manchester United and Liverpool. They could go somewhere else and have 30,000 seats each if it wasn't for the fact that there is so much attention given to people who are there not for their love of Manchester United or Manchester City or Liverpool or Everton or wherever it happened to be.
There may be younger listeners, Kieran, thinking to themselves, I wish I'd seen Wembley when it was the old Twin Towers. You don't. It was just, I don't like to swear, it was a shithole. Wembley, and now it's a comfortable shithole. I think I should point out on your behalf, Kieran, that when you say Spurs have the best business model in the Premier League, you are in no way endorsing the increase in season ticket prices or the taking away of cup prices for old age pensioners.
No, yeah, and thanks. You're absolutely right. I've discussed this on Spurs podcasts.
Yeah.
But the pure business model, Spurs are the most profitable club in the history of the Premier League. And we view the industry through a different lens to that. But this is a football finance show. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that.
Our next question, Kieran, it's another one-namer, which I don't approve of. I'm going to go with Reis, but it's a sort of Swiss-German spelling here. Right, R-E-I-S-S-E, so it might be Rice. Who knows? I'm not entirely sure of Rice's motives for asking these questions, Kieran, but
stalker.
Question number one, and I have two questions for you. First of all, what is Kieran's morning routine? Now, that's the sort of question that Uncle Terry used to ask of a security guard just in passing as he was going through an airport 25 years ago. Number two, what is Kieran's research process for answering questions on the pod? I was going to say, should we start with mine? But no, let's crack on. Let's break the back of this question first with doing your research process. What is your morning routine, Kieran?
It is very much a routine. So wake up at 5:30 and I then go through a series of lists. So I check WhatsApp to see if there's anything come in from any of our contacts overnight. I then go to my emails and I've got a VIP company's house email account, so I'll check to see if anything's come through that. If so, I'll update the spreadsheet. I've got Google alerts with regards to every football club in England and Scotland and a few other topics as well. So I'll trawl my way through those. Then I read The Athletic, especially, I mentioned it before, Matt Slater, Phil Buckingham. And so then I'll read the Times. I used to read The Telegraph as well, but I've just got fed up with, which is a shame because the sports guys at The Telegraph are good. But the Telegraph's gone so loopy recently. I've just got fed up. And then I'll check my Twitter account. And again, I've got sort of specific bookmarks for, our friend Martin Calladine, Philip Auclair, Swiss Ramble, of course, Joey Durso, Martin Ziegler at times, Matt Slater. So it is a very, very regimented approach. And I'll be writing things down. I've got my little mind map that I use for the show. I do my mind map in terms of what's going on. And having run through that, which normally takes me an hour to an hour and a half, we then go for our dog walk. So, because Finley by this stage is, if he sees that Everton's accounts are out, he goes, "Oh, Jesus Christ, that's put my wonky chomp time." So we then go for, I am a workaholic. I won't deny that. That is 7 days a week, that routine. And then I start my day job, because I do have a job at the university. And again, what I try to do is because I've got sort of the football stuff is quite demanding. My students will have a list of questions. They now contact me via WhatsApp, and we do Zooms and so on. So I try to sort of stay sort of as much 9 to 5 as possible with my university commitments, with the exception of, annoying you by going on TalkSport with the Voldemorts of.
Do you know what, Kieran? I was going to finish this question by going into a lengthy explanation of my research process, but I think let's just leave it at the fact that between us, we work very hard on answering the questions on this podcast. We should say it like that, just in the same way that between us, we've got 130,000 followers on Twitter. We'll just leave it at that.
And in terms of the second question, what's the research process for answering questions on the pod? It does, of course, depend upon the nature of the question. I use Google just as much as anybody does. But I do have the accounts for every club going back 30 years or more. I do have the spreadsheet, which is Access. And, because we've sort of built up a network since we've started the show, I can now go to our secret chief executive or executives. We've got our secret managers, plenty of lawyers who are absolutely fantastic, who do give their time and advice, and I really appreciate it. Of course, we do have some secret footballers, but not the secret footballer, or do we?
How was he supposed to answer that question? For those people, by the way, following the Dave Kitson, where I was pressured, shall we say, from above to ask whether Dave Kitson was the secret footballer, which how can he answer that question without those people who have been asking me ever since, and there are a lot of them. Joel Ward is not the secret footballer. That was Dave Kitson, who may or may not be the secret footballer, deflecting or not, as the case may be, whether he is or is not the secret footballer. It's not Joel Ward. I can absolutely promise you. And people at home will go, well, you would say that because Joel Ward will have strong-armed you into doing it. Joel Ward couldn't. It's too nice to strike. It's not Joel Ward. Daniel King has our next question. Daniel King says, this is an interesting one. How is market value calculated for naming rights and shirt sponsorship?
Right. This is a really good one, Daniel. What we would do here is that we would use something called comparative analysis. And to put it in its sort of simplified form, how do you value your house? Well, you would look to see, have there been any transactions in your road, in your street recently for house sales? You would then say, well, we've got a south-facing garden. We just had a new bathroom installed. Oh, they've got a garage and we've got on-street parking. And you would make some mental adjustments for that. So when it comes to any form of valuation in football, and this includes valuing clubs as well as valuing individual deals, what you would start to do, you start off by saying, let's choose ourselves a peer group. So, if Palace were looking for naming rights for the new stand, they wouldn't compare themselves to Manchester City or Arsenal because those clubs are that much bigger. So they'd be looking, say, well, hold on, what about Leicester, the King Power? What about, would we be looking for stadiums of a roughly similar size? Then they would say, well, okay, well, how much was that deal worth? that was King Power was 15, 20 years ago. So we add in a bit of inflation. We'd add in a bit of the fact that we're in London. You can get a premium for London, and you just come up with a series of tweaks and adjustments. There is no definitive model. When I'm doing club valuations for people who occasionally get asked to do that, I always hasten to say the spreadsheet will pick out a value of £3,426,727. That's just a start point for negotiation. That's just, don't sell it for £1 million and don't expect you're going to get 10. So these figures are always guidance. And in terms of the fair market panel that I think that Daniel is sort of referring to, and the potential charges against clubs for inflated deals, you're looking, are you taking the mickey or not? So if you've got a third division team who's got a brand new owner who says, £20 million front of shirt deal, and you go, well, hold on. You've only got an average crowd of 3,000 and nobody comes to watch us. We're not getting TV deals. That would get rejected because you would be benchmarking against other League Two clubs and so on. So it's to stop clubs from taking the Michael.
Yeah, so it's a bit like image rights, isn't it, for certain players? As long as you stay within, like you say, don't take the mickey, then people will nod it through. But this next question, Kieran, comes from Rob Spillane. Under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't ask it because it's a sort of well-travelled path. It's a good question, but it is something we have discussed. But the reason I will ask it, Kieran, because it does sort of specifically want an answer to something that we've all been talking about, but perhaps haven't got the real details. And Rob says, what checks do the EFL and the Premier League conduct when assessing a new club owner? And why do those checks sometimes take such a long time? So I think without going too specifically into 777, I think we'd all probably quite like a reminder or finding out for the first place what specific criteria the EFL and the Premier League are looking at.
There is an element of self-certification, and it used to be a very, very easy bar to pass. Since our friend Trevor Birch arrived at the EFL, I think the EFL, they've upped their game. The Premier League, I think it's fully aware of the degree of scrutiny that it's under, and the Premier League, as we've said on more than one occasion, isn't in favour of the independent regulator, so therefore wants to be able to prove that self-regulation works. And I read this week that the Premier League's legal bill last season was over £20 million.
Wow.
An awful lot of which would have been directed towards OADT issues. So there are broadly two tests. First of all, do you have an unspent criminal record? If you have done time and you've served your sentence, that's okay, although there are certain criteria of crimes. So if you're on the sex offenders list, for example, you wouldn't be able to become a football club owner. If you've been done for fraud, that could have implications and so on. So that they do look, if you've been involved in more than 2 insolvencies since the rules were introduced, which does mean that those directors of clubs that were involved in multiple insolvencies some time ago, they are in the clear. So that's the first test. And then the second test really focuses on the owner rather than the directors, because the directors are there to sort of run the company on a day-to-day basis. And it's all to do with the funding of the club. First of all, do you have the money, A, to buy the club, and B, to run the club, let's say 18 months to 2 years. So this is how much it's going to cost you to buy the club. Let's take a look at the deal. And then let's take a look at the losses made by the club. Have you put together a budget? So we've got a rough idea of the total cost, because we saw Steve Dale bought Bury Football Club for £1.
Yeah.
David Hilton bought Scunthorpe United for £3. Brighton were sold for £56.25. So, but the cost of actually buying the club it can be insignificant, but do you have the resources to fund the losses? And then I think the big issue, where's that money coming from?
Yeah. Can
you show us the money, in effect? And I always say to people, again, you look at things from a sort of historic, sort of forensic or investigative point of view. If you follow the money and then you start to get closer to things. And we saw with Chris Kirchner, he did show the money, and that does appear to have been quite elaborative. And a lot of people were fooled by that. We've got William Storey, who tried to buy Sunderland, tried to buy Coventry, I think it was, and he's been slagging off the owners of both of those clubs, tried to buy Reading. And then for some reason, the money didn't appear to be there. And then finally we come to 777. And the issue with 777 is how is that organisation being funded? I think we'll probably do a deep dive on the next show with regards to it, because you say that is an evolving story. So that's it. And it's the same. We are now operating in an environment, and without giving too much away, I think I probably have hinted at this before. Last year, I gave a talk to National Crime Agency, Europol and Interpol about fraud in football. I'm a nerd, and I enjoy sort of doing sort of the nerdy, going through the weeds type of thing. And it was interesting talking to some of the people who were involved on sort of the policing side of things. And they were saying that their concerns is that major areas of fraud and money laundering can these days, sort of the easy areas are fine arts. How much is a painting worth? I don't know. Football transfers and football ownership and crypto. Yeah. And that's where their focus was. And I don't think there's enough attention given to that, mainly because you can't go public on things which you will know on a private basis.
20 years ago, Kieran, we know it seemed to be like it was an almost cartoon process 20 years ago. Somebody would try and buy a club. The EFL or the Premier League would get their photocopied sheet out of the back of the drawer that had 3 boxes on it that you would tick. Is he in prison? No. Let's not go on to question 2 and 3. But from what you've told us about talking to Interpol and criminal investigators across the world, do the Premier League and the EFL have a team of forensic investigators now that are looking into these things? Or is it still Barry from accounts gets called in and late on a Wednesday afternoon? And also the second part of Rob's question is, and again, you can't ask this without reference to 777, why is it taking such a long time?
I think if we answer that second question first, because the Jim Ratcliffe deal went through very, very quickly.
Yeah, relatively so, yeah.
He showed them the money.
Yeah,
and
right, okay.
777 have consistently failed to provide evidence of a suitably high quality to satisfy the Premier League's team. Who are that team? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the Premier League's legal bill, £20 million last season. So they are using professionals, and that's just the legal team. They'll also have both their forensic guys, and they'll be using third parties as well to investigate, because they do have a responsibility. And here, you've got to give the Premier League credit, and it comes in for a lot of criticism, but you've got to give them credit. 777 aren't the owners of Everton Football Club, because the Premier League does have reservations. And whilst it's minded to approve, it's still in seeking further data from Josh Wander and co.
Our penultimate question, Kieran, is about a club owner. It's not been a good season for Huddersfield Town. It certainly wasn't a good weekend for Huddersfield Town. But James Weir would like to know, he says there doesn't seem to be much information out there about Kevin Nagle, the American owner of Huddersfield Town. What do you know about him, and how wealthy is he? How has he funded his sports operations in the USA? And will he follow a similar philosophy in the UK?
In terms of Kevin Nagle's background, I think it's a classic case of the American dream. He came from a very impoverished background, but managed to get into university. He went into investment banking, which is, I think I work hard. I don't, because I know how long the hours that investment bankers work. Admittedly, they've all retired 20 years before I will. But so it's very demanding. And then he went into an industry which, from an American point of view, is ridiculously lucrative, which is healthcare.
Yeah.
In the United States, they spend double the amount of money as a proportion of GDP that takes place in Europe, and considerably more than double than, unfortunately, we commit to in the UK these days. And he was involved with a company called Envision, and I don't want to talk about American healthcare. I know too much about it for my own good, but big pharmaceuticals, big insurance companies, big hospitals, they're all in it to make money, and they're making money out of people that can't really turn. Yeah. There's not anywhere else to go.
Yeah.
So he was very successful with a company called Envision, which was sold for around about 2.3 billion. He's then invested in properties and so on. Very, very smart guy. He's got an NBA team called the Sacramento Kings, which I think he sold his share in that. He's got Sacramento Republic, which is in the United Soccer League, which is it's the equivalent of the championship, except that there's no promotion to MLS. So he does have money. With respect to Huddersfield, clearly, a bad weekend for them. The club's losing money, spending more than 100% of income on wages. The parachute payments have gone. It's tough times. Yeah. They got a solid support base, and there's no reason why they can't come back. Although, as always, it's going to be it's a tough division. And they've got Birmingham there as well next season with, again, new American owners who will be wanting to make their mark. So I think it will be quite a scrap at the top of the division next year.
I felt so sorry for that hardy little band of Huddersfield fans at Ipswich on Saturday. So I've been in that situation where you're there when someone else is getting promoted and you're not. It's hard to join in the fun, Kieran. Basically,
yes.
Really, it's one of those things we explain to a steward. We don't have to stay in. We don't have to. I don't want to. I'm not interested in Ipswich players getting in trouble. Just let us. I've got to go back to Huddersfield. Our final question, Kieran, comes from Robert Sheard. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Robert, but my mate Bristol Mark is Mark Sheardown, so I'm assuming this is a short version of Sheardown. So Robert Sheard we're going for. It's a good question, Kieran, but all I will say, I'll refer you back to our question above. Any question that ends with, I'd love to hear your thoughts, normally says, right, if I'm going to tell producer guy in future, any question that ends, I'd love to hear your thoughts, needs to go in the middle of the pod so I can go off and make a cup of tea, essentially. There's no point putting it right at the end because I haven't got time to make a cup of tea. But Robert Sheard says, for several years now, I have felt that of all the potential financial excesses in the top football leagues, the greatest evil is transfer fees. I'm sure my idea is naive and or absurd. It's not, Robert. But I still think all of football would benefit if transfers simply didn't exist. Players, managers and clubs should all fulfil their contracts and eliminate these fees completely. That would require everyone to be more careful about the length of contracts and salary terms. Then, in the final year of a contract, the current club would have the right to offer the player a renewal contract, but he'd be under no obligation to accept it. Everyone is a free agent when his contract expires. This would also eliminate agents' fees based on transfers. Agents should be paid, as they are in other industries, by their clients, based on a percentage of their salaries. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you know what, Cal? I think even the most experienced oboe player in the world would struggle to get through that question without 4 or 5 deep breaths. It's a good question, Kieran. Get rid of transfers. I mean, wages would go up incredibly, I imagine, and smaller clubs would probably suffer. But I don't know if the greatest evil is absolutely right, but it's certainly a contributing factor, isn't it?
It is. And I draw your attention, Robert, to the European Union court ruling, which took place earlier this week, where the Advocate General, so it's not a ruling, it's guidance, has reached the conclusion that transfer fees are restrictive and potentially in contravention of EU laws with regards to freedom of movement.
Oh, okay.
So, could we, and this was in respect of a player who I think he was playing for Spartak Moscow, and he wanted to move, and he wasn't able to do so because the transfer fee being demanded by the club was prohibitively high. So this is effectively it's a follow-on from the Bosman ruling. If I want to move jobs, if you want to move jobs, if anybody wants to move jobs, you hand in your notice and you move over. Your existing employer doesn't get a compensation fee for me leaving. They drive me to plenty of other places, I'm sure at my place. So there is a case for saying that the transfer fee is restrictive. It is impacting upon the rights of the individual. How this Advocate General's advice is taken up in court, I think will be intriguing. It's gone completely under the radar with regards to the media, but absolutely right. Yeah, it's a boring legal case, but it is very much current. The current position is that if a player breaks their contract without just cause, then the current club is entitled to compensation, and we call that compensation a transfer fee. So we could, Robert, be in a couple of years in a position where transfer fees don't exist, complications in terms of gardening leave, because we've seen the likes of Dan Ashworth, who wants to leave Newcastle, but can't do so because the two parties can't agree. I know at Brighton, our head talent identifier, Sam Jewell, he's moving to Chelsea, but again, they can't agree a fee. So he's doing gardening leave as well. With regards to players and managers fulfilling their contracts, I've got a bit of a reservation. What happens if you move location and you and your family are homesick, you don't settle in, and you've signed a 4-year contract? Not being able to move until the end of that contract seems to me to be harsh. Now, you could argue that therefore just go and sign a 1 or a 2-year contract. My concern there would be football is a short career. And if you talk to players in the National League who are mainly on 1-year contracts and many times on 10-month contracts, I can assure you that the vast majority of them would be more than happy with a 3-year deal. Because you go to a bank manager or a building society and say, I'm a professional footballer, I've got a 10-month contract, will you give me a mortgage? You'll be escorted out of the door. Yeah. So there are a series of complications here, and we've got to look at what is best for the player and what is best for the broader football. I think you raised an absolutely valid point, Kevin, in the sense that we know that there are development clubs.
Yeah.
And whilst we say that there's 3 forms of income in respect of football clubs in the form of ticket sales, broadcasting and commercial, player development and player sales are quite essential. And then I'd also be concerned is that if you're not going to get any compensation for the players that you've developed, why bother to have an academy? Because you work hard, you've got a player, they come through to the first team at the age of 18. You've put, 6, 8, 10 years worth of training and resources into the development of that player. And there's no other industry that I'm aware of where there's a 99.8% failure rate. Yeah. It would mean that small clubs would have no incentive whatsoever. And they, and under the elite player performance plan, which is very much geared towards the interests of the bigger clubs, they get a pretty raw deal at present. But I think if this was introduced, that the big clubs would just hoover up 100% of the talent.
I may have been flippant about the length of Robert's question, Kieran, but it is the sort of question that would spark debate in pubs up and down countries, I think, about the virtues of transfer fees against the iniquities of them. But I think there's one sentence, and we have on this pod no particular animus against most agents, but I think nearly 100% of all football fans would agree with Robert's statement that agents should be paid as they are in other industries by their clients based on the percentage of their salaries. I don't think many football fans would disagree with that, would they?
I think most agents are given a proportion of the player's salary if they've negotiated the contract on behalf of the player. So that is fairly constant. The broader issue of agents being paid by clubs, that historically was my viewpoint too. And when I was researching for the book, the Price of Football book, I got in contact with a couple of chief executives. And I said, why are you doing this? And they said, because the agent can actually do good for us. Let's say that we've got a player who's come through the academy, established in the first team, and we think he's happy because, local lad, playing first team football. And he's not paid the same wage as some of the other players, but he's not been in to complain to me. So therefore, you'd assume they'd be happy with lot. And then you put yourself in the shoes of that 21, 22-year-old young man, young woman, whoever it's going to be, who's a professional footballer. They would find it very intimidating to go into the office of a 50-year-old professional executive who knows all about contract law, who knows exactly about how much everybody else is being paid at the club and so on, and say, I'm just not enjoying myself. Yeah. I feel I'm being used and abused because I know that I'm not on the same money. So therefore, what happens is the player moans to the agent. The agent gets on the blower to the chief executive. And then this was an actual example given to me by a chief executive. And we said, okay, tell you what, we'll increase the wages by this. if your client agrees to extend the contract by another 1 or 2 years. So the football clubs get protection because the players, the Bosman date gets extended.
Yeah.
The player is happy. So the player's getting more money. Happier player equals improved performances, which means better results, which means better bonuses for the club in itself. And that's because the agent has acted as that interface, because the agent's job is to go, so look, my client's unhappy, this, that, and the club goes, you're exactly, yeah, okay, we take that on board, problem solved. So when I listened to that, and that came from more than one chief executive, it certainly changed my mindset, because, if I was 21, I'd be terrified of going into such an environment.
Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you, and it'll get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes, end of season quiz coming up, Kieran. You can do all that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And you can go to the same website if you'd like to buy our book or one of our other books, or get yourself a Price of Football T-shirt. We will be back the day after tomorrow, Kieran, with news. Just 2 days' time for the news pod, which will feature 777. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
I think the day after tomorrow is the name of a film.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's sort of.
I'm sure it is. I'd be amazed if there isn't a film called The Day After Tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you to everybody at Patreon. We are honestly chuffed that you are supporting the show in that way. It does allow you to listen to the show without adverts, which some people don't like. So that's one solution. There's another way you can support the show, and that's to give us a review. And thank you so much, by the way, for all of the reviews that you gave in the light of the 500th show. They were very, very touching. Doesn't matter what you say on the review. So if you want to cut back on paperwork, you could even say you'd rather have the show presented by Chris Kirchner and Josh Wander of 777. That'd be fine by us.
Well, I don't know. It's Josh Wander would want paying cash, wouldn't he? And producer Guy's view on paying cash to anybody. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.